I'm Eric Torres. I'm an instructor here at CanTV, if you don't know me. And for those who do know me, welcome back. It's good to see you. I'm going to be doing this session along with Andrea Alberti, the other trainer here at CanTV. And Rob Galetta is also going to be helping out on the technical end. So, all right. I'm going to start by telling you guys an overview because the goal today is to kind of like get you reacquainted with the camera, with the video camera, with concepts of lighting, of optics, things like that. It's an overview. And so I'm going to go a little bit fast. This is being recorded. And so those who want to spend a little more time looking at details, you can just go back and look at the video. So we're going to start with a overview of the camera and lighting, and go from there into the various functions of the camera. And the camera we use here at CanTV, of course, many of you are familiar with that. So Panasonic. Okay, well, but before we get into the camera, as I mentioned, let's talk about light. Because you can't really use your camera properly, I think, if you don't understand light. And so it all begins with light, and it actually begins with your eye. There's natural light and artificial light. And my preference is natural light. And natural light, for one thing, because it's already there, and you can take advantage of it. And secondly, it's a beautiful, usually it's a more beautiful color and more beautiful tone than artificial light. And so the only thing is, with natural light, you can't control it as well as artificial light. You have to go with what's going on. And so the sun is moving through the sky and changing, and it's the time of day. The color of the light changes and things like that. So there are definitely challenges. There's challenges to both techniques, both methods. If you're using artificial light, like you see some lights set up behind me, it takes time to set them up and to adjust their color and things like that. But then they're set. With daylight, you know, it depends. You got to plan. It comes back to what Andrea was saying last week about planning and you know, figuring out, you're going to have to look at what the weather is and things like that if you're going to work with natural light. But anyway, you know, if you can use natural light, great, and maybe even supplement it with artificial light. That happens a lot too. It's good to be flexible and to do both. So anyway, getting back into light, the qualities of light. Light is very, you know, it can be very directional, it can be very harsh, or it can be really soft. Last week I did a dry run, and the room was actually a lot softer lighting because it was a cloudy day. Today it's more direct lighting. So the intensity of light is really important, and we have some examples that we'll show along the way of how different intensities of light in different directions affect the way it looks. The direction of the light can be bounced. You can bounce it off of a card, you can bounce it off of an umbrella. If it's a cloudy day, it's already being bounced. It's filtering through clouds. Some people will position their subject near a wall and take advantage of the wall. The wall reflects light softly usually, so you can take advantage of your environment. Color. The color drastically changes. We're going to get later into a discussion on color temperature. Color temperature, many of you know, is an expression of the color of light. And it's a deep discussion, but just briefly stated, it's the color of the light, and it's on a certain scale, the same way you have a Fahrenheit or Celsius scale. There's a Kelvin scale for lighting, and you've heard about this before probably. Daylight is a certain color, artificial light is another color. So you have to decide, do you like the effect it's giving? You can set your camera so that it's kind of neutral, so that it just is sort of it's not a dramatic look, it's more just like, well, how I look right now is pretty neutral. Then there's times when you want to be more creative and you want the lighting to be, say, really reddish or orangish, like to imply that it's the morning or the afternoon. In that case, if you adjust your camera, say you're shooting at sunrise, if you adjust your camera to that, it's going to kind of neutralize that beautiful orange color. It's going to make white look white. You know, we talked about balancing using a white card. When you use a white card, first of all, you know, you've got to put it where your subject is. If your camera's way in the back of the room, you're not going to go white balance back there because maybe the light is fluorescent back there. You got to bring it up to where the subject is. You've got to angle it towards, between, actually the correct angle is between where the camera is and where the light is. So if the light's over there and the camera's right here, you go halfway between those. And you also go halfway upwards. So you zoom into that, you do your white balancing. Now, like I said, if you're doing this in the morning when the sun is rising and you white balance to this white card, well, you're gonna lose that beautiful orange color. It's just gonna look white. Skin is just gonna look like just normal color. So you don't wanna white balance every single time you shoot. You might want to go with the results your camera is giving you. So that's a judgment you make at the scene, at the time you're shooting. So, you know, if you feel like you need to shift it though, let's say it's just middle of the day and you want it to look more like sunrise or sunset. Well, then you want to shift your color towards those ends of the spectrum, towards the reddish end of the spectrum. In that case, you're going to have to do some things. You're going to have to do some manual adjustments. And so we'll get into that also. Right now, this is just an overview, so I'm going to keep going. All right, so there are different lighting schemes. If say you decide I'm going to shoot indoors, I'm in an office or whatever, I'm going to set up some artificial lights. Maybe the CanTV lighting kit is a really nice, it's a nice kit, believe it or not. Some people look at it and they think, oh, this is so old school. Why are you using these old hot lights? They're hot. They're tungsten bulbs. I can get burnt on these things. Well, yeah, they are hot and they use a lot of electricity. But in my opinion, I prefer tungsten light to LED lighting. You know, right now LED lighting is very popular. Tungsten lighting to me is warmer. It's closer in color to natural sunlight. So I'm happy that CanTV is still using it. So that's to me a good option as long as you know what you're doing. So with artificial light, there are different lighting schemes. Maybe we can take a look at those slides real quick. If Rob could post those up, be nice. So then there we go. Now this is a very basic lighting scheme. This is a single light. And so you can see where the subject is and where the camera is. And so your light, this is easy. I love it because it's easy. It's one light. You have it off to the side, 45-degree angle to your subject. Okay, the subject is looking in the direction the subject is looking. Think of that as your central axis. And then the light is somewhere else. And so between, I mean, the light is, you know, 90 degrees is an angle, is a turn. So halfway between that, 45. And so you know, figure out where the person's shoulder is aiming and figure out where their face is and go halfway between that. And there you go. So you set your light up there. And 45 degrees from above as well. And that's a very simple lighting setup. But it does give you a dramatic look. And we're going to see some examples of that too. Okay, there's number 2, where you take it up a notch. And it's less dramatic because you have a fill light coming from the other side. So the fill light has an umbrella, or you can bounce it off of a wall, or I prefer actually a diffusion filter. These lights come with little mounts, they're little frames that you can put diffusion on them. And so diffusion, we're going to make it available as a resource after this meeting. I guess look for it tomorrow. Some of those resources, like where can I get diffusion and how much does diffusion cost and things like that. So anyway, you can put diffusion to make that softer. And it doesn't show in these diagrams, but the key light, which was that first light that we set up, that can also be diffused. It doesn't have to be so harsh. And then this final setup number 3, we can see there's also a backlight that would be it's like a kicker. It puts a little halo behind you. It helps separate you from the background. And that's usually set high up above you, downwards. Or it can be extremely low if it's not practical to put it high up. It could also have a gel on it. It could have something changing its color. And that makes it look a little more jazzy, a little more glamorous. It's kind of Hollywood-like, lighting. But you got to keep it toned down. You don't want it too bright, or it's going to look like the person is on fire. So just a little hint of color in the background is great, on the back of someone's hair or their shoulders, especially if they're wearing a color like, say it's a black shirt and the background's dark. They're going to blend into the background. You know this, I think. So let's move on to the next example here. This is some do's and don'ts, in a way. You have a situation where someone is being interviewed in front of a window. That's a really tough situation. If you can avoid it, you should avoid it. Don't put someone in front of a window, because your camera, especially those of you that are just too lazy to do things manually, if you just have your camera on automatic, that's what you're going to get. You're going to get basically a silhouette. So at the very least, have some light coming from the side. You can see the side lit is a better look, but it's very dramatic. Let's move on to the next one, please. Okay, this is an improvement above the other, where I'm front lit, and it's nice soft light coming from the window. It's not direct sunlight, and you can see that as a different feeling. It's a different mood. It's definitely a more upbeat mood. So again, it depends on what the mood you're going for. If you want drama, then stick with the side lighting, or with the artificial lighting, stick with just the one single light. All right, let's see. The next thing we've got here, high angle lighting and frontal lighting. So the angle, as I was mentioning before, light is directional. Figure out where your light is coming from. If it's coming from above, you're going to get these dark shadows under somebody's eyes. So try to have it more direct. You can see also wearing glasses can be an issue. It's not always a problem, but it can be. Now that frontal lighting is also diffused. So there was a diffuser. There was some soft material in front of the light. Okay, so I want to get on to the camera. Usually when we teach the classes here at CanTV, we talk about setting up your camera first. This is a checklist. You can come up with your own checklist. There's no one checklist for this sort of thing. Each camera person, each cinematographer has their own technique, but these are the typical things you want to do. You want to definitely decide on your format, and you can see it shows you there the menu options for how you do that, how do you change your format. And I'm going to talk about formats more in depth just in a little while. You want to adjust your viewfinder. These are basic things. Adjust your diopter, so Rob, if you could go back to me for a second, appreciate it. You want to adjust, thanks Rob. You want to adjust your diopter, so that it's for your eyesight, for your vision. And also deciding whether to use this diopter, whether to use the viewfinder or using the LCD screen. Basic choices. So, if you're shooting on a bright day, I would go with the diopter here, because this will shade you. It'll shade all the glare out of your eye, and you can concentrate on the image better, which is going to be an extremely important thing to do, because I'm telling you, something always falls between the cracks. Focus is my Achilles heel, especially as I get older, my eyesight gets worse, and I can't trust my eyes as much as I used to. And so when you're shooting, you're usually pretty busy. You have a lot on your mind. You have a lot of details to deal with. Sound especially is extremely important. I'm not going to talk about sound today. It's a whole other huge subject. But so you've got a lot on your mind, and you're not always paying attention to your focus. At a glance, it probably looks fine. And again, most of the time you want to do these things in manual, not in automatic. But anyway, you know, a little thing like focus is actually a big thing. You know, it may look okay on this little tiny screen in here, but later you go look at your footage. This happened to me. Rob knows this a few months ago before the COVID crisis. Anyway, and I had a speaker at an event, and the close-ups were blurry, and I was kicking myself. How did I do that? I've been doing this so many years. It happens to the best of us. And so anyway, you have to really double check certain things like focus to make sure your focus is good. And so there's little techniques for that too. And so we'll get into that too. But back to our camera checklist, you know, your formats, you're gonna wanna go into your menu, you know, things like that. You're gonna want to set up the correct format. And so the format depends. And this is a common question. We get this a lot. What format should I shoot in? Well, because there are a lot of choices, and I prepared a slide for that. There is a slide coming up that has a list of different formats, and we'll talk about that in a little while. But the format depends on many things. If you guys, you who are tuning in, or if you're CAN TV producers, you know what the Program Services Department requires. Just to review that real quick, they require it to be an MPEG-4 file, and they like it to be 720, which that refers to the lines, how many lines are on the screen, how many horizontal lines there are. And 1,080 pixels, 1080 pixels. So each of those 720 lines will have that many pixels. So that's what they require, but that doesn't mean you have to shoot like that. You can shoot whatever format you want for artistic reasons, for creative reasons, or for practical reasons. So let's handle those separately. Artistic reasons, okay, that's gonna be the look of your piece, the look of your video. So you probably wanna shoot in high definition. So that already limits your choices to that, because your other choice is standard definition. So most people these days want it to look sharper and clearer, so they go for high definition. But which high definition? There's a long list there of choices. So let's talk about practical reasons. Practical reasons would be how much space do you have available, for example, on your hard drive when you're editing? How long is it going to take for your computer to process it? So the larger the file, the longer it's going to take, and the more space you're going to need to store it, and so on and so forth. So you might not, especially since most things end up on the internet, on YouTube and Vimeo. And as I said before, for CAN TV, it's being broadcast in high definition, but it's only 720 lines of resolution. Just to give you an idea what the heck that means. There are people shooting much higher resolutions, but that's mostly for theatrical release. If you're going to project it in a movie theater, then you're going to want, yeah, at least 4 times that. They call that 4K. What we're shooting here at CAN TV, it's not even 2K, not even 2,000 lines of resolution. It's more like 1,000. So 1K, which is sufficient for broadcast. For viewing on television, that's great. So don't overdo it, in other words. Don't overkill. You don't have to, definitely don't have to, don't do 4K. If you guys have 4K cameras out there, if any of you want to do that, not if you're just going to show it on CAN TV or the web. What we have with this Panasonic camera is actually great. The quality is totally sufficient for our purposes and your purposes. So if we can take a look at that format slide again, Rob, that'd be great. Because again, there are some choices that do have to be made. So you have to decide, for example, is it going to be progressive or interlaced? So when you see, first of all, there's a lot of letters on the left side there, PH and PM, and it sounds like a pharmacy. What those mean are, those are just Panasonic designations. So PH is actually the highest quality. Highest quality meaning the megabytes that are required. The megabytes are how much data is being crunched in, per microsecond, whatever. there's a lot of data for that setting, 21 megabytes per second. HA is medium quality, that's like 17 megabytes per second. HE at the bottom there, that's extended record time, so that's the lowest quality. So for CanTV though, I would recommend the PH, some of the PHs. So I would recommend, for example, the 720, it's the fourth down from the top. 720 59.94p. Now, like I was saying before, you can choose between progressive and interlaced. So just a quick refresher on what does that mean. Interlaced video, that's old school. That comes from the early days of television. And that's where cameras were recording odd lines first, and then the even lines. And so you have these two, they call them fields. Your odds and your evens. And they happen so fast that it looks like one image. Each frame is composed of odd lines and even lines. The ray gun that's in the camera paints the lines. And this came back from this guy who used to be a farmer and figured out, hey, why don't we do it like we farm a field? Let's just paint lines on the screen. And so, yeah, they come together and they interlace. That's why it's called interlaced video. And so you get a lot of these interlaced frames every second. Some people wonder, okay, well, what's the difference between shooting at 30 and 60? Okay, well, 60 ends up being just like 30, really, because 60i, 60 interlaced, is really just 30 full frames, 30 full frames, because it's 60 half frames. In other words, there's 30 that are odd. I mean, sorry. Yeah, 30 are odd, 30 are even. Together that makes 60. But the way it plays on television is the same as 30 frames per second. So why do 60 versus 30? Because 60 is twice as many times that the camera is looking at reality. It's looking at the environment twice as many times, and so it's like it's taking in more bits, more moments, more fragments of time, and putting them together into those full frames. And so it does have a higher, a little bit more detail. But these things are just, the average person is not going to notice the difference. In case you're like, wondering about that, I wouldn't get too fussy about these things. I would 30 is fine. 30 is perfectly fine to shoot at. And if you want to shoot at something that looks more like a film, say you're shooting a dramatic piece, you're shooting a drama, and you want it to look like an actual film, well then, you're going to probably want to shoot at 24 frames per second. So if we could take a look at the chart again, we'll just get into some detail there. I think this is a good artistic choice for those that are shooting dramas. If you want it to look, I guess it depends on the drama, because if you want it to look like a telenovela, or you want it to look like a sitcom, okay, just stick with video. Just stick with 30 or 60, that's fine. If you want it to look more like a film though, you're gonna want to go to 24 frames per second. So you can see that's the third one down on the left there. And there's also some DV choices in red. Like I said, DV is digital video. That's older technology. That's much less quality. I wouldn't go with that unless for some certain artistic purpose you're trying to make it look that way. But I would stick with the AVCHD. That's MPEG-4. That's high definition. That's much better quality. So I would go with the third one there. Okay, let's advance to the next one, please. All right, bit rates, we talked about that already, so we can keep going. And these are just referencing the camera, so let's move on. All right, now this one we're going to come back to at some point, because when you're talking about focusing, as I mentioned, there are tricks to getting the focus accurate. So there's a button called EVF DTL, Electronic Viewfinder Detail. It's next to #1 there. And I always use that. It puts a little emphasis around contours, around edges of things when they're in focus. It used to be called peaking in the old school television days. So that, I would always have that on if I were you. It's inside the panel of the camera there. Can we move to the next, please? Okay, apertures. These are all, I'm going to breeze through these because I'm going to actually demonstrate some of these things. But it is important, of course. This is one of those things that can be done manually or automatically, and very rarely would I do it, would I have the camera in auto for the exposure. The exposure is how bright your image is. That's controlled by a lot of different things, and one of the main things is the aperture, which is part of the iris. The iris is the thing that opens and closes on your camera. I want to demonstrate that too to you. Because a lot of people, I don't know, we deal with a range of different folks, and so some people may not have had contact with a film camera, with a mechanical camera, let's call it, and so they might not, they hear these phrases, they hear about apertures and shutter speeds and neutral density filters, and a lot of it remains mysterious because they're all inside of the video camera. All these things are hidden in here, and you can't see them so easily. So, so I've created a few things to express this. So let's say, and unfortunately, I can't demonstrate it with the webcam here. It's just my computer, and that's on automatic. And so I wish I could. It'd be great, but. Maybe there's an app that lets you do that, but anyway, let me demonstrate irises and shutters to you. Okay, I've created this little demonstration. I call it an armature because it's all these things rigged up. But anyway, it's composed of a lens, as you can see, and it has, this is my homemade shutter. And the shutter, as you can see, is spinning because that's the way they used to work with film camera. They still do. Film cameras have a rotating disc. And the thing about it is you can change the opening. And so, as you can see here, this little contraption allows me to make it a smaller opening. So I can go a lot smaller with this. Now, why would I want to do that? I'll tell you why. Because as this rotates, it lets light flash through. Light is your subject, the people that you are recording. And so the process is pretty simple. This comes from way back, 19th century and before. Light comes through the lens. The lens focuses the light on something. It used to be just paper. People used to get inside of a box out in the field and just look at the image being projected onto the wall, and were amazed by that. The camera obscura, they called it. Anyway, so it projects onto something. Usually in our case, it's a sensor. It's an electronic sensor. And it used to be film. It used to be what you call the film plane. And it would, the light, if the lens is properly focused, the light rays would converge onto that film plane and give you a sharp image. So that's the goal for most of the time. But there's so many things that can go wrong, or things that you can manipulate on purpose to happen. And so I better just step back and take this one thing at a time, because I'm jumping ahead here. So let me go back to the lens for a second. Back to the iris. This is from an old, actually this is from an old news camera, reporter's camera called a Graphics. And I'm gonna turn on a little light back here so you can see some light. And the iris, let's see, let me get where I can control it. Oh, there it is. Okay, so see, it can close and it can open to allow less light or more light. Now, the smaller this opening is, the bigger the number. And the larger the opening is, the smaller the number. So this controls how much light is coming through. I'm going to just go ahead and open it up all the way. So that's one of the factors that controls your image. How bright your image is and how sharp it is will be your iris of your lens. The second factor is what you call the shutter. And the shutter, like I said, in the old days, it used to actually move. It used to be mechanical, and it still does for people who shoot on film. And so if I spin this this shutter, sorry, I keep calling it an iris. If I spin it, you see it makes the light flicker. And that's because, you know, the opening is allowing it to pass through or not. I was mentioning about this shutter, able to change the opening of the shutter. And so I'm going to make it smaller opening. All right. Yeah, let's make it significantly smaller. So on a film camera, there's certain high-end film cameras that allow you to do this, and it's called the shutter angle. You're changing literally this angle here. It was 180 degrees, now it's more like 45. So yeah, you can make it quite a bit smaller. What does that do? It allows the light through for much shorter amounts of time. So those are the two factors that control your image and how it's exposed, is how big is the iris opening and how much time is it allowed to come through and hit the sensor or the film or the wall, whatever it is. So here's a smaller opening. So you can see that the bursts are shorter. Anyway, I think you can see that. I hope you can see that. So the way the film cameras used to work, there was a claw. It's important to know these concepts, I think, because it is all applicable to what we do nowadays with video. So before, a film camera would pull film into position, and the shutter was closed. Let me get my shutter again so I can make that clear. So let's say that the film is here, and the shutter is in front of it. See, it's closed. Can't see the film. And so the claws would pull the film into position, and then it would stop. And then the shutter would, you know, this is just spinning, just constantly spinning. So it would spin at the right moment to expose that film back there. So boom, it exposes that one frame, and then it closes. You can't, you know, and then another piece of film comes in, another piece of, you know, so another exposure is made, and so on and so forth. And it happens many times per second. For film, usually it's 24 frames per second. Every second, 24 times a piece is pausing and getting exposed. So if you want your video to look like film, that's why you would set it for 24 frames per second, because that would mimic that look. And it's more flickery than video because of this opening and closing, opening and closing. So, you know, it's going to look a little more staccato. It's not going to look crystal clear, smooth like video. And so that's something we're acculturated to. We've been going to movies for many years, and so we recognize that as a film. You know, it has a certain aesthetic to it. And so that's why people do it on purpose, and they make it look that way. So yeah, that's shutter and iris. Now, like I said, the more you understand these concepts, the more you can control them, and you can control the look of your camera. And so you're going to want to control the depth of field, for example. The depth of field is how many objects are in focus. And so, you know, this camera, this particular camera, this Panasonic AC-130, has a really great lens on it, but it's designed mostly for wide angle. So it's designed to get up close. I think they had journalists in mind for this. You see journalists all over the world using cameras like this because you can get really close to the action, and it gives a wider angle of view than a lot of other cameras that are on the market. And so, because, you know, a lot of times there's a crush of journalists, and they're all just trying to get close to somebody, Or maybe it's a small room and they're interviewing somebody. When you're in a small room, you don't have a lot of distance to work with. You want a lens that can get a wider angle. So for wide angle work, this is great. So the zoom, the compromise is the zoom does not go as far. You can't zoom in as far as other cameras. Oh, there we go. There's an example. Now, this is an example of an aesthetic choice of why you would want to control your depth of field. And so the example on the left, the bananas. You're seeing bananas that are sharply in focus. The example on the right, you see this little Ottoman figure here. And so the image on the right is what you typically want to do when you're trying to draw someone's attention to a particular subject. Say you're interviewing somebody. You don't want the background to be distracting. So you would want to limit your depth of field to that. And there you go. So how do we do it? It can be difficult, especially with a video camera. Video cameras tend to have quite a bit of depth of field. So it can be tricky. It can definitely be tricky. So what you got to do is, when you're trying to do a shallow depth of field, you have to keep in mind that the best thing to do to make less things in focus is to have a wide iris, to have in other words, a large aperture on your camera, because light rays will be more random that way. There's a bigger opening means the light rays can come from many different angles. And so the focal plane is only going to show a certain limited range of things in focus. If the iris is really small, all the light rays tend to converge on that point. And so there's more space in focus. It's a larger depth of field. And so that kind of ruins your effect if you're trying to do a shallow depth of field. I think in general, most people, especially CAN-TV producers, are going for the large depth of field because they're documenting events, sporting events, things like that, church services, etc. And they want everything in focus. And so in that case, yeah, go for the smaller iris opening. But if you're doing something more dramatic, want to call attention to something, try to limit your depth of field. Make a shallower, smaller depth of field. So you're going to want to open up the iris. So you got to do whatever it takes to open up that iris. Now, what happens when you open up an iris? It gets brighter, right? The scene gets brighter. And so that might be a bad side effect. You might not want to, it could be blown out. It could be way too bright. So what you might have to do is then adjust your shutter speed. So we talked about that a second ago. Just so a quick review, everybody who has taken this class knows that your shutter here is activated with this dial select button, and then you keep hitting dial select until it says shutter on or shutter active, something like that. It's obvious. And then you can dial the shutter wheel and it will change the shutter speed. So if your iris is really wide and it's too bright, then there's different things you can do. Like I said, you can make your shutter speed faster, make it a higher shutter speed, because light will be coming through for shorter amounts of time. It's not a mechanical shutter, like I said. It's all digital. It's all in the guts of the computer of the camera. It acts like a shutter. It chooses shorter amounts of time for the light to hit the sensor, or it processes shorter bursts. Who knows? But anyway, you can go for a shorter, a faster shutter speed, and that will dim the image down. The faster your shutter speed, the dimmer the image will be. And there you go. You can have a wide iris and still have a nicely lit subject. You can have your cake and eat it too, in other words. So it's always a balance. You're always trying to decide what to prioritize, and you have cameras that say things like shutter priority or aperture priority. That's what that means, is you're deciding which one is the one that you're trying to manually set. Yes, f1.4 is a larger iris opening than f2.8. That was a question just asked. Um, like I said, the smaller the number, the larger the aperture. Now we do have a slide that actually tells you how that is calculated, if anyone really wants to know. And it's the focal length of the lens divided by the diameter of the optics. That will determine your f-stop. The focal length is the distance between the glass elements and the sensor or the film plane, back where the image is made and the light rays are focused. But anyway, that's for nerds. I mean, we don't need to know the formula, just to understand the principle that you know, the smaller the number, the bigger the opening. And you know, cameras usually go around 2.8, and that's a pretty decent iris. But some cameras will, as Scott just mentioned, go as even at a 1 point something. That's what you call a fast lens. The more light a lens allows in, the faster that lens is considered. It's a fast lens. You can shoot in much dimmer light with a camera like that. Now, those are expensive, though. Those lenses are quite expensive. It's very difficult to make a lens that good. Its optics are extremely complex. That's why the lenses are so expensive, the good lenses. Because to make it, you're trying to like bend all these rules of physics. You're trying to make light do all these crazy things and still give you a decent image that's not stretched or distorted, or there's a lot of distortions that happen. I've got a slide later on that shows you a distortion, but anyway, let me stay on track here. So, okay, the detail button and the function button. All right. So let me fire up a camera here. So you have ways of making sure that your image is in focus. As I mentioned, you want to start by putting the camera into manual focus. And then what you're going to want to do, and this is just a reminder, you know this, I'm sure, you want to zoom all the way into your subject, into their eyes, and sharpen their focus. So that's the basics of it, but you can do other things. Like I said, turn on the EVF detail button, and then you can see better, like if something's actually in focus. And you can also do the focus assist. So the focus assist button on this camera is right here. Let me hold up another camera, I'll show you. All right. Right there, focus assist. So when you press focus assist, the camera has two types of assist. There's one that's called expand, and there's another one called in red. And other cameras will have their own terms for it, for their own version of that. But focus assist will, if it's in the expand mode, it actually blows the image up bigger in your viewfinder. It doesn't record it that way. It blows it up bigger, and then you can actually see better, like, oh, is it sharp or fuzzy? The other mode, which is called in red, if it's in focus, it puts a little red detail on it. Especially if you have the EVF detail button also pushed, it'll pop. It'll show up better. And so those are extremely useful. Other cameras have features where it'll actually show you a waveform, and that's pretty cool. It's like a luminance waveform, and when things are sharp, those luminance, the peaks of those waves are like really perky and sharp looking. They're like really spiking. And then when it's soft, they kind of like wilt a little. You know, so whatever focus assist your camera has, I would definitely use it, because I'm telling you, you're going to regret it if you don't pay attention and double, triple check your focus during your shoot. Because later, the bigger screens that you look at it on are going to show you all your mistakes. It's going to be obvious if you don't catch it. So I do those kind of double, triple checks with video, but also with audio, especially audio. I want to make sure the audio is good. So we'll talk about that in another workshop. Okay, so anyway, moving right along, I wanted to get back to depth of field for a moment and just demonstrate some of that. So I'm going to share my screen now. So you can see, let's see what we got going here. I want to show you the image of a camera that's set up, and it's set up to get different things in focus. I'm going to go over there and I'm going to play with it. So anyway, first I'm going to start by zooming out. When you're zoomed out, as I mentioned before, a lot of things are in focus. That's the way optics work. When they're in a wider angle, more things are in focus. But when you zoom in, less things are in focus. And I've set this up so that I can actually shift focus from one subject to another subject to another subject. Now that subject in the back is not all that well lit, so probably a little hard to see that little llama back there, but you can see this little duck character pretty well, I think. And then shifting back to our foreground. I'm doing all of this manually. So this would be impossible in autofocus. I think just for fun, I'll kick it into auto and see what the camera does. So I'm putting it in auto right now. Oh, look at that, it's just going all haywire. It doesn't know what to focus on. It's actually shifting around randomly. It's decided it likes the duck the best. So if I want to shift to the foreground, I can't, it's in autofocus. I'm gonna have to go back to manual focus. So that's what I'm gonna do right now. Okay, I'm in manual focus now. So I get to decide what is in focus. So one thing that professional camera people do is they don't just randomly do this kind of stuff. They will actually put tape on the lens barrel. They'll mark it. They use this white tape. I don't think I brought any with me today, but it's called camera tape. It could be any tape really, but it's a real thin little tape, and you put it on two places. You put it on where the focus ring is. You put a piece of tape on there. And then on something that's stationary on the camera body, you put another piece of tape. And then you would make little marks, like where a certain thing is in focus, you put a mark across. And you may even write down what that object is, and then where something else is in focus, maybe make another mark, and so on and so forth. So then you're pulling from one mark to another mark to another mark. And those are called focus pools. So you're pulling focus. It used to be called racking focus because it was a more mechanical thing that you have to, but yeah, whatever you call it, it's pretty cool. You can shift focus from one subject to another. And you see this all the time in movies. You see this in documentaries. You may see let's see, let me grab something here. You may see a person in the foreground. So here's your foreground person. They're a little pale, sorry. But, and then, you may want to shift focus from them. Oh, they're not, hold on a second, they're not prepared for the situation. That's better. Okay, so anyway, you can, this person will be up close, whatever, and you'll be focused on them. And then you typically will see the camera shift focus and they go blurry, and then somebody back there gets sharp. And usually it's like a line of people like sitting at an event or something, and you shift from face to face to face. That's pretty cool, common technique that's used. And so yeah, that really relies on you having control over your depth of field.
Just want to okay. Set up a two pieces of tape here. And this is what he was talking about. So now I know I'm in focus because I kind of haphazardly put these two pieces of tape on.
All right, thanks. Yeah, that's a good. Yeah, next time I do this, I'll be better prepared. I'll have my white camera tape ready to go with my little marks. And a lot of times in professional films, they'll actually have a whole job. A person who's just a focus puller. That's their job, and they've got a little wheel they turn, and it's got all the marks on it, and it's just like whiteboard, little white plastic thing. They just go from mark to mark as necessary. It's actually pretty tricky. It might sound easy, but it's an art. So anyway, that's depth of field and pulling focus. You also need to have control over other things, because just knowing two of these things is not necessarily enough. Maybe changing your shutter speed is not the solution. Maybe that's going to cause other side effects that you don't want. Maybe, for example, you want the background to be blurry, like if things are moving in the background fast, you might want them to blur, and if you have a fast shutter speed, they're not going to blur. So you might want, this is what happens at a slow shutter speed, for example. This is a classic photo, by the way. Things distort. Things that are in motion, they could blur. In this case, the car is not blurry because the camera was moving with it. They were like panning as the car went by. They swiveled, so they caught that. But the background is more and more blurry the further back it goes because the background is shooting through the screen, through the frame, whereas the car is relatively stationary. So, and yet, you know, it's a slow shutter speed. So while that shutter is going by, you know, that opening I talked about, let's say I got a wide shutter opening. So while it's spinning, in that time that it's spinning, a lot of things can happen. So if it's a car moving, you know, then you're gonna see like that distorted image, like that the wheel looks like an oval, it doesn't look round anymore. So yeah, you have to take those things into account. You've got to think about what will happen if I go to a slow shutter speed, fast shutter speed, etc. So anyway, let's, again, if I want to do a slow shutter speed and I want a big wide aperture so I can get shallow depth of field. All right, great, but then the image is going to be so bright, so blown out. What can I do? Well, you can use your neutral density filter. Okay, on this camera, there it is. That little wheel there, ND filter. So you can dial it up. I'm sorry, it's just like a mirror. I'm looking at a mirror here. So yeah, you can make it darker and darker and darker. And those are physical filters. Those are like glass that are darker and darker tones. And it's like sunglasses, you know, it'll tone down the brightness of the light coming into the camera. And meanwhile, you can be all creative with your iris and your shutter. You can do a lot of stuff. If you master all these techniques, if you get these concepts down. Now, a lot of times when you're shooting in daylight or a well-lit room, artificial light even, you most likely want high quality, fine grain of an image. You don't want your image all grainy looking. Be careful that your gain, there's gain right there. Make sure your gain is set to low, not medium or high. You know, because the medium and high settings, that's kind of a last resort. That's when you don't have a lot of light to work with. It artificially brightens the image. It happens in the computer of the camera. It just takes the pixels that are there and it multiplies them and makes the image brighter. But the compromise, the trade-off is grainy image. It looks, yeah, it's not smooth looking. And you've seen that in some of the classes you've taken. So I'm not gonna go through the trouble of demonstrating that right now because I'd have to dim the lights and all this other stuff. But you get the point. So the checklist of the camera, we covered that, but you know, you should just go through your checklist, set these things to what you want them to be. Now this part of the presentation has to do with more creativity. This is perspective. This is, you know, your framing, your composition. So, you know, a few weeks ago, I went to Whole Foods and found this line of people waiting 6 feet apart from each other to get inside. So the image on the left is taken directly frontally. So it looks like a puppet show. It's Punch and Judy, you know, you just see people, it's like a flat plane. And it's good, I mean, it's all right. It illustrates what's going on. But in and of itself, it could be better if it's also got the second image there, which is called isometric. That just means it's from an angle. And it gives it more of a feeling of depth, of three-dimensional depth. Maybe the two images together, the two angles would work well together if you go from one to the other. But yeah, that's one of the things you have to keep in mind. You may have all this mastery over all these technical details, all these little gadgets, but if you aren't being creative with the way you're using your camera as far as what's in the frame, then what's it all for? You know, you have to definitely think about the subject that you're presenting. And yeah, just be creative. Okay, symbolism. There's another thing I saw. This was at Home Depot a few weeks ago in the gardening section. No people, just these really kind of scary, you know, creepy plywood cutouts of people. It freaked me out. So anyway, you know, using a camera creatively to express things. Be aware, you know, be conscious of what's in front of you. You may have an elaborate plan, you know, you may have come up with a treatment like we talked about last week, like Andrea talked about, and a script and so on and so forth, but, you know, keep your eyes open, be ready for the unexpected, you know, try to take advantage of things when they happen. This was on 18th Street, you know, spontaneousness. And, you know, this also was taken not even with a professional camera. You can be ready for action with whatever you have handy. This was with my cell phone, I think it was. And this was Easter. So the Stations of the Cross, it's a tradition in Pilsen. They go through Pilsen like that, but not usually with masks on. So yeah, these are the points I wanted to make about that. And I think I'm gonna finish it here. And by the way, that's George Eastman, the Kodak, inventor of Kodak, on a steamship. So I'm gonna open it up, I guess, to some questions. And yeah, if you have feedback, please, those are our email addresses there. The phone number, you're probably gonna end up leaving a message, but you know, at some point that'll be checked. We still have some time here because the meeting was scheduled until 3:30, so if you guys have questions, go ahead, please. And we can open up the mics too, if somebody wants to speak with their own voice, feel free.
Hello.
Hello. Hello, who am I speaking
Hi.
with?
This is Tony Harper.
Hey, Tony, how's it going?
Okay. What model camera is this that you're working on?
The Panasonic AC-130.
Okay, that's the newest one.
Yes, well, there are other models a little beyond the 130. There's the 160, for example.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm speaking new in terms of what we've been using at CAN. That's one of the newer ones that you had at CAN, correct?
Yeah, this is what we're still using. It's still, it's a workhorse. These cameras are built like a tank. Panasonic makes a tough camera and it's still totally kicking, you know?
Right, because I remember the Sony camera, and I don't remember that one being quite as I guess detailed as what you went through there and explained to us. So, but good presentation. I had my notes out while you were going over everything. So. Oh,
thanks. Yeah, it was a lot to cover. It was, I don't think I hit everything. But yeah, I think we got most of it though. We got most of the points covered. I was pretty surprised I got through as many points as I did.
Now, as far as the white balancing go, is that it? If I remember, I might be confused with another camera. The white balancing was not necessarily needed for that camera, correct? It was more of what was it that you can push a button and it automatically color balance?
Ah, okay. We do actually have some time to talk about that because I think it's important to white balance pretty much every time you shoot. Well, let me take that back for a second. First of all, go with the basic rule. Like if it looks good, it is good. All right. Like I said, you don't have to like bust your brain on everything on this camera to get a good result. If it looks good, it is good, okay? So then just move on to the next thing. The next thing might be audio, you know? Now, if it doesn't look good, if you feel like, okay, the color isn't quite right, Well, first of all, be sure you're distinguishing between color and exposure. People do confuse those things. So I would
Okay.
start with a good exposure. Make sure your subject looks, not too bright, not too dark. Make sure you're getting their tones in a good way. Because you could try white balance. Some people think you're supposed to white balance right off the bat. First thing I do, I got to white balance. No, because if the image is too bright or something, it's going to affect your white balance. It's not going to work properly. So I would start with getting a good exposure. And that, before you even get a good exposure, start with getting good lighting. That's why I started this whole thing off with lighting. You should trust your eye. And when we teach the studio class, that's what I tell people is, you don't need to look through some fancy little viewfinder or hold up a light meter and measure the light. No. Just use your eye and look at the subject. Does the subject look too pale? Do they look like, is the contrast good? Do I need to add more fill light? Things like that. Is it sharp? Start with that first. When your eye is comfortable with it, okay, move on to the camera, move on to whatever the technology is that's getting the image, and adjust that. Okay, and so then adjust your tones, adjust your exposure, then worry about color. Okay, so color comes next. And so that's why you would want to white balance. Not sure anyone is confused about white balance. I don't see any confusion. I think everybody knows what I mean by white balancing. Yeah, using color white as a standard, as a guide, because and it's technical, purely technical reasons. You're using white as a guide because white has all of the colors of the rainbow. The entire spectrum is contained in white. So if white looks white, all of the other colors will fall into place and be correct. Now this is when you're trying to make it look neutral, like white looks white and red looks red and green looks green. That's not when you're trying to like really shift it and force it to be different. Like if you want to force it to be different, then you don't white balance on something white. You put some other color up in front of the camera. If I white balanced on this red shirt, wow, that would really change everything. So you can shift the spectrum in the direction you want to go by placing that particular color in front of the lens and white balancing on it until you get what you want. Now, that being said, you can also, there's some pretty cool features on this particular camera where you can manually just dial through the whole spectrum of white balancing. I don't know if I can demonstrate it, but you know what? We'll send it to you later because
Okay.
I don't want to screw this up, but it's pretty cool.
Oh, that's fine.
Yeah. Who's talking? Who's speaking right now?
It's still Tony.
Oh, okay. Okay. I think somebody else might have had a question, but Tony, did you have?
There's a question from Ed in the chat. I don't know if you can see it. Just 2 or 3 messages. I can read it off to you.
Okay.
But he says, I know cinematic is 24 frames per second. It would seem on the surface that the smoother look would look nicer, as in, I think he's saying wouldn't 60 frames look nicer since it's more?
Yeah.
If you want to touch on the concept of like what cinematic is, I guess, and why 24 is different from 60 visually.
Okay. Yeah, I have something to show you. Well, actually, I don't know if this is going to help, but I feel like showing you anyway. So I'm going to, because it's related. All right, now we're going to change the shutter speed, which can be done easily enough on most cameras. On this camera, you just turn this little knob here. And I'm going to take it all the way down to a 12 frames per second. Anyway, it's noticeably slower. You can see through it for a longer amount of time. Okay, now we're going to change it to a faster, much faster shutter speed. We're going to go for about 30 frames per second, which is about what video shoots. Okay, so quite a bit faster. And then we'll crank it. And the faster your shutter speed, the less light has a chance to get through. It's shorter bursts of light. So that means it's going to be a darker image unless you compensate for that by opening up your iris, which most cameras have. So you would open up your iris. See, you can see the iris there, way back in there. Okay. So basically, that gives people who've never seen a mechanical shutter or a film shutter before an idea of what's happening. Aside from the little rig that I made. When you're shooting 60, it's I mentioned before that you're actually the same effect as 30. Technically, in a way, it's the same. It's 30 times per second, you're getting an image. You're recording an image. 60, the way that you're recording the image is different because it's interlaced. So you're getting 30 of the lines that are even. You're getting 30 even lines and 30 odd lines put together, and 30 times 2 is 60. It's as if it's 60 frames per second, but it's not. It's more like 60, what you call half frames. And so that's the way that the camera is looking. It's scanning the image twice as often as at 30 frames per second. So if you're looking at things twice as often, recording that into the memory, then you have more data to work with than you have if you're just looking at it 30 times per second. All of these concepts start to get a little muddled together because there's a lot to think about here. Let's just start at 30 frames per second, okay? Every second the camera is recording 30 pictures, which it will play back sequentially to give the illusion of motion. Now, each of those pictures is being exposed for a certain fragment of time. That certain fragment of time depends on your shutter setting, how wide open your shutter is. Is the opening small, or is it a wide shutter angle? The smaller the shutter opening, the smaller the amount of time that the sensor is being exposed to the image given by the lens. And so you can capture fast action with that. When people shoot sports, that's exactly what they're doing. When people are shooting sports, they usually shoot at a fast shutter speed so that they can capture the fast-moving details within smaller increments of time. When people are shooting more like a dream sequence, or someone is supposed to be on drugs or something, or drunk, they shoot at a slow shutter speed, and things will tend to be more blurry. Things that move, things that are in motion will blur. So the difference between 30 and 60, I think I mentioned before, if it's just someone like me sitting here talking, you're not going to notice. You're not going to notice the difference. But if you're shooting something that's a lot more active, you're shooting sports or something, you're shooting a train going by, you most likely will notice a difference. You'll see it'll look more clear if it's at 60 than it will at 30. So I hope that answers your question. I think what you have to do is, and this is what I do, experiment. You're going to have to experiment for yourself. Try those different things and see what they look like, because that's the best way to learn. That's the best way to understand something is with your own eyes. I could tell you five different ways, but it's better if you see it for yourself.
Yeah, well, that's all great information, and I love your explaining things. The thing I was kind of wondering is, as you said, 60 would be more smoother, and it seems like, why wouldn't feature films want to be more smoother? I know 24 is the standard, and has always been the standard. I was just wondering why they wouldn't want to be more smoother.
Yeah, well,
that's my question.
Yeah, well, that's actually a problem that filmmakers have kind of wrestled with since the early days of cinema. They found, for example, when you're panning from following a subject and you're panning, if you pan too fast, it's going to look jerky. It's stuttery. They determined there's a certain maximum speed that you can pan, and because they do generally they want it to look in focus. They want it to look sharp in general. But yeah, they had the mechanical limitations of their camera, and you still do because, yeah,
Okay.
film is
Cool.
24. Yeah.
Okay.
Um,
Thanks.
yeah. So, like I said, you know, it's film, and so people have accepted that it doesn't look as smooth as anything else, except that's the texture of it. You know, that's the art form. That's film, and so we have that expectation. So anyway, yeah,
Thanks.
sure. So, okay, we still have a few more minutes left. If anybody else has any questions or
Looks
comments.
like Scott does.
I'm just curious, was that a Bolex camera that you showed the shutter speed example?
Yeah, that was a wind-up Bolex. Yeah, it still works. I couldn't believe it. I thought it's been sitting on a shelf in my house for years, and I didn't think it worked, but it actually still works. It's amazing. I think some of the features were broken, and they somehow miraculously healed themselves. It's weird. Yeah.
That must be a feature.
It's a feature, yeah, self-repairing feature, yeah. So
Chicago filmmakers had a couple classes using the Bolex in the past. I don't know if they still do.
I don't know. I've been around a film school in a while. I know that photography programs still require people to shoot on film, and actually, I think the film program at Columbia does too. The first-year students have to shoot on film. At least they were up till at least recently. Shooting on film. And, you know, there's still filmmakers who prefer shooting on film. You know, I would, if I could, if I had the budget, I would rather shoot on film. This is a whole other discussion. We're opening a can of worms now. In fact, it turns into a debate sometimes. But yeah, my 2 cents is I like film. I love film. My father taught me film, and I still do it. And yeah, my father is, I think he's still part of this chat. I think he's in here somewhere.
Yeah, I see him.
But anyway,
Raphael.
yeah, Raphael. Anyway, there he is.
I gave him that Bolex years ago.
Speaking of film, just since you brought it up, and I'm not debating. You remember that the camera shop that used to be across the street over there from the old studio on Green Street, Eric, where you used to go buy the film for the cameras and everything. I don't even know if there's a place around where you could buy film anymore.
Oh yeah,
for cameras.
yeah, there are. If you want, we'll put that in the resource list too. Like I said, we're going to send some resources. So
Right.
Yeah, I wanted to show people also where can you buy gels, diffusion,
Right.
gaffer tape, things like that.
Yeah. That was a place where you used to buy the stuff at like that, but since they closed, I haven't seen anything else. But yeah, that'd be great if you can provide that.
Yeah, I think Andrea put together a resource list. I'm not sure if it has those particular things on it, but one way or the other, we'll make sure that we put that
Right.
out.
Yeah, my resource list is more for like stock footage or royalty-free stuff, since people can't really go out and shoot like they want. If you wanted to create your entirely own project out of just already pre-made assets, then yeah, that's what that resource would be good for.
So yeah, so I'll work on the other stuff. They call it expendables, things that you use and then they're thrown away really because they're done, like your gaffer tape and gels that get all torn up and whatnot. And that's also part of something you budget for when you're planning a project, your expendables, because that stuff, it does add up.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's kind of what Andre was talking about last week, and you know, in terms of your the subject last week she covered, she talked about a little bit about that, the adding things that you might need in your pre-production and things of that like that.
Yes, and it's important stuff, and some things, of course, you can improvise with. You can make your own bounce cards. You can make your own sets. You can make a lot of stuff yourself. You can get in-kind contributions. Definitely on a low budget production, you want to be creative. You know, in so-called third world countries, they have to be. They have nothing to work with. They just come up with, you know, they'll take a tin can and make it into, you know, a special effect, whatever, echo
Right.
chamber or something. So yeah, it's good to improvise and be creative, especially nowadays. You have to be. And you know, I guess one of the things I really like the best about this session we're doing right now is that we're talking as if it's all going to work out. You know, we're going to get past this crisis we're in right now. People are going to make films, they're going to make videos, going to make TV shows. I'm glad you guys are keeping it alive. I'm really pleased to see how many people have tuned into this session today. Kind of surprised, really, pretty shocked, because when we were designing these workshops, we thought, oh, maybe we'll get 5 or 6 people, you know. So
well, you know what's funny? That's the way it worked when you did it in the studio. It would just be a handful of people.
yeah.
Right, yeah, it's easier to get people to agree to a digital meeting than a real one, apparently.
It's easier to attend, yeah, digital.
Yeah,
meeting,
yeah.
yeah, it's definitely easier to attend. All right, I'm gonna look
And
forward.
also having it as a reference on video is also great too.
Yeah, I mean, it's for me, it's like I teach this stuff and I don't get to actually do it as much as I want to. Yes, I do freelance and I work on some projects, but you know, everybody has their dream project. They want to work on this or that film, and it's hard to do. It's just as hard while you're holding down your job, or right now under the circumstances, very hard to do anything. And so yeah, it's, you know how they say teaching and doing are 2 different things. So I always keep that in mind. You know, even though I've been doing this a long time, I never take it for granted that I'm going to get a good result. You have to work at it. You have to have your checklist. You have to double and triple check your audio, your video, your focus, your this, your that, your frame. You know, you may be so busy adjusting your audio and you don't even notice that somebody is not even in the frame anymore, you know. So we are all, you know, at Cable Access, most people are like a one-man band. You know, they have to do a lot of stuff themselves. So you have to get good at juggling these different things. It takes time to get good at it. You're not necessarily going to be totally great at it right off the bat. So for people that are just getting started, just keep that in mind, but it gets better. I mean, the more you do it, the more experience you get, the easier it gets, and your checklist becomes less on paper and it becomes more in your head, but it's still good to have something on paper sometimes. So we only have a couple minutes left. Is there anything else anybody wants to cover to wrap this up? Any last second request for, you know, for this particular subject, for field cameras?
Great job. Thanks.
Oh, thanks. Thank you. Thanks for tuning in. And I want to also encourage everybody to come back again for our other workshops that we're going to be giving, because yeah, unfortunately, I don't think this situation is going to change anytime soon. It could be weeks, it could be more likely, it could be months. So we're going to plan more workshops. And I think that even after the facility reopens and slowly life begins again and people phase back into what they want to do, I think we have enjoyed these online workshops and we find them really useful, and I think we're going to continue to do it. We're going to keep doing other workshops and recording sessions and things that we're going to try to make available to you guys. So we're always going to add a link at our website, cantv.org. So so please look for other things. So thank you everyone for tuning in. So thank you very much for doing this, for being here, tuning in. It was nice to see all your faces and hear your voices. And we'll see you again.
Yeah, likewise. Yep.
Yeah, so we'll see you again at another workshop, hopefully, everybody. So.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys. Talk to you soon.
You're welcome.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Take care, everybody.